Tonight on Bridge City News, this is Budget Day in the province, a time when the UCP shares how they hope to balance the books by the year 2023. The owner of the Movie Mill in Lethbridge is claiming unfair practice in its goal of bringing top movies to its fans sooner. And the federal Tories were on the offensive again, claiming Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is bowing to radicals during the countrywide blockade disputes.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Today is Budget Day in Alberta. It's the second budget for Jason Kenney's UCP government, while our province's Finance Minister Travis Toews is saying Alberta remains on track to end the deficit. The opposition NDP is warning people to brace for more cuts. The province has lost around 50,000 full-time jobs since Premier Kenney was elected last spring. Toews says the plan is to balance the books by 2023 while introducing a new blueprint to boost employment. 6 private sector banks project our economy will grow by only 1.7% in 2020, which is a full point lower than the prediction in the first UCP budget presented last fall. NDP finance critic and Lethbridge West MLA Shannon Phillips says she expects deeper cuts in health and education to make up for the low price of oil, which is now below $50 US a barrel. The province budgeted for oil to be at $57 US for this year, with it rising to $63 in 2 years' time. The province has popped the cork on legislation that calls for making it easier for adults to drink alcohol in parks. The UCP says the change will help update the province's liquor laws. Last June, the province allowed drinking at 14 picnic sites across the province, provided it was consumed with food. Once passed, Bill 2 would apply to all parks and give park owners the discretion to allow drinking or not. The new law would also drop the food requirement for drinking. The UCP is also looking at introducing a recall act where you can potentially fire your MLA, mayor, or city councillor if you don't like the job they're doing. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson has the details.
This is very much supposed to be sort of a democratic renewal thing. If you don't like your representative, you should be able to, get rid of them. I think where this could get interesting, could get fun, could get dramatic is to what extent this can be weaponized or used by various special interests to, muck around in politics outside of the election period.
Legislative reporter Tyler Dawson will also have details on which capital projects the province is investing hundreds of millions of dollars in. That's coming up after business news. The owner of the Movie Mill in Lethbridge has joined other independent theatre owners expressing concern that they are not receiving popular films in a timely fashion. Len Binning, who hosts the Movie Mill Minute on Bridge City News, says a petition on change.org has generated over 13,000 signatures supporting the ability for independent operators to show films at the same time as Cineplex.
Yeah, a petition was raised by the Real Theatre in Vancouver, and they're voicing what we've felt for years, in that Cineplex was 75% of the market, wields unfair dominance over the product supply. And things have gotten slower in the last couple of years. We used to get films 3 to 6 weeks after release. Now it's sometimes 3 to 6 months after. And with streaming and DVD breathing down our throats, it's becoming more and more difficult to run a successful business. If we can't have film, we ultimately won't be in existence.
Binning says he's also concerned with the takeover of Cineplex by UK Cineworld, saying the theatre business may become even more competitive, making it tougher for smaller businesses like his to survive. February is Black History Month. Lethbridge College and the University of Lethbridge have decided to celebrate the city's diversity and honor the legacy of Black Canadians from both the past and present. BCN's Loris Alexander attended the festivities and has the story.
Thursday morning, Lethbridge College celebrated Black History Month with dance, food, and more importantly, a chance to learn about African cultures.
Sometimes we go on about how people don't know about other cultures and all, but we don't do that much to showcase it and show other people. And how are they going to know if they don't see it, you know what I mean? And I think that's why things like this is really great, because you get a chance to show other people, and then when they get intrigued and entertained by the little things, then they come and ask more questions.
The organizer of the event wishes that some of the classification and stereotypes about Black people would no longer exist, and further states that it dates back to the 1600s.
We've had a history here within Canada and the United States, if you want to put it to that broad context, where Blackness has been equated to being a criminal. And when you think about the history of slavery as well, where Blacks were running from being enslaved those freed people that were trying to free themselves were classified as criminals. So you can see today that for some can argue that some of this classification continues today.
The University of Lethbridge also celebrated Black History Month Thursday morning, with speakers talking about their cultural experiences. For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
The Royal Canadian Legion in Lethbridge was a busy place again. Today at SACPA, the topic of discussion was, is community support for children essential?
Raising children and raising healthy families is a community issue. The key thing that I want to bring is an informed conversation about the decisions that are being made, about supporting children and families, and really be a unifying driver. Not be having a divisive conversation, but a conversation from the joint perspective of that supporting children and families is a necessity. How do we do it best?
The province of Alberta and the city of Lethbridge have recently implemented changes to child and family services, offering more protection for kids in our community. Two members of the men's volleyball team with the Lethbridge College Kodiaks have made the all-conference team. Fifth-year outside hitter Carter Hansen was named an all-star, as was second-year player Quinn Buchanan. The Kodiaks hosted the ACAC Men's Volleyball Awards Banquet last Wednesday to help kick off the evening. Head coach Greg Gibbos says the two are both dynamic players.
Super exciting to see those two guys get rewarded. They're two athletes who spend a lot of time really working hard in the gym, really trying to be good teammates, and really trying to be leaders in our community. So for them both to get recognized individually, Carter as a fifth year and for the second time, and Quinn for the first time as a second year, are two really exciting things, right? We're really excited about the youth that's in our program, and Quinn's a good representation of that, you know, being a second year athlete and already working his way to a league all-star.
The men's volleyball championships begin tonight. The Kodiaks' first game is 8 o'clock in the quarterfinal against the Lakeland Rustlers. Parent-teenager relationships can be challenging at the best of times. Parents offer structure in the house, and sometimes teenagers do not want to play within that structure. Lissy Reno is a 20-year-old who wrote a book on how to smooth over some of the issues between mom, dad, and their teenager. She says it's very important to continue building the relationship and to do so through effective communication.
What the world is going to say is to teenagers is you should talk to everyone else. You should talk to your friends. You should talk to your mentors. You should talk to your youth group leaders. But the last person in the world to talk to is your parents, because there's that fear, that shame and embarrassment. And so I think if parents can really work through that and help build the relationship of trust and openness, that would be so helpful in navigating all of those relationships.
Lissy will have more advice on how teens and parents can strengthen their relationship coming up later in our show. A GoFundMe campaign has been set up to support a family from Okotoks that lost a father and a child in a highway crash February 23rd while they were on a road trip in British Columbia. According to reports, 47-year-old Mike Coughlin was driving with his two sons, Liam and Quinn, when he missed a curve in the road and went off a steep embankment near Kamloops. Police say Mike was dead when they arrived on scene. 8-year-old son Liam died on his way to the hospital, and his other son, 5-year-old Quinn, is currently on life support. As of today, the fundraiser had already raised $30,000 to support the family. Indigenous youth leaders say protests at government buildings, highways, and rail lines will continue until the RCMP and pipeline company Coastal GasLink leave traditional territories in northwestern BC. Indigenous youth were camped out in front of the steps of the legislature in support of the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs.
When this happens and the media paints us as criminals, it puts us in danger. It incites hatred. It gives excuses to bigots to hate. And we know that there's people out there who do not wish us well as Indigenous peoples. So we implore you to be fair and accurate in your messaging, because our youth group here has literally had to get de-escalation training, self-defense training. We are young Indigenous peoples, two-spirited trans peoples, peoples who are the most marginalized peoples in society, yet are answering the call to hold the line for all collective futures.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was blasted during question period once again over the rail blockades. The NDP pressed Trudeau to meet with the Wet'suwet'en chiefs in BC, while the Conservatives are accusing Trudeau of bowing to pressure from radical activists.
Illegal blockades continue to hold this country hostage with no end in sight. By failing to lead, the Prime Minister has shown eco-radicals exactly how to delay, disrupt, and ultimately defeat major energy projects. Canadians are suffering. Over 1,500 people have lost their jobs, and hundreds of millions of dollars in damage has been done to this economy. Are the unelected, unaccountable radicals at the blockades in charge of this country? Or is the Prime Minister?
I think we know the answer to that. Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Once again, Conservatives are pitting Canadians against one another with their divisive language and their dangerous rhetoric. They're ignoring the complexities of the situation and exploiting divisions within the Wet'suwet'en community for their own narrow political gain.
As blockades continue to spring up across Canada, Public Safety Minister Bill Blair says it is very important to allow law enforcement agencies in each jurisdiction to do their work as they see fit.
The jurisdictional responsibility in the province of Quebec resides with the provincial government, and we are in discussions with them because we are partners in maintaining a safe environment. And so the police of jurisdiction have a responsibility, but there are various legal mechanisms and remedies that are available in the province of Quebec and right across the country if there are issues to be resolved. And so I have confidence in those processes.
Like what, Mr. Blair?
Well, there are, for example, in terms of the courts who issue an injunction in the province of Quebec, set its terms, and they have it in their ability a capacity to set additional terms. But again, I don't think it's appropriate to comment on that. I think it's appropriate to allow those who have jurisdiction to determine the best and safest way for them to effect their lawful purpose and fulfill their responsibilities.
The coronavirus has now claimed more than 2,700 lives around the world and affected more than 80,000 people, mostly in China. In Canada, we have 11 confirmed cases of the disease. South of the border, U.S. President Donald Trump responded to the Center for Disease Control, which said that it is not a matter of if, but when the virus becomes a pandemic in the United States.
Well, I don't think it's inevitable. It probably will. It possibly will. It could be at a very small level or it could be at a larger level. Whatever happens, we're totally prepared. We have the best people in the world. You see that from the study. We have the best prepared people, the best people in the world. Congress is willing to give us much more than we're even asking for. That's nice for a change. But we are totally ready, willing, and able. It's a term that we use. It's ready, willing, and able. We have. It's going to be very well under control. Now, it may get bigger. It may get a little bigger. It may not get bigger at all.
6 people, including the gunman, were killed following a shooting at Milwaukee's Molson Coors Brewery complex yesterday. Police said the shooter took his own life.
Officers located the suspect, a 51-year-old Milwaukee man, deceased from an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound. At this time, we have located 5 additional deceased adult victims. The victims all worked at Molson Coors, and no members of the general public were involved.
Because there were 5 individuals who went to work today, just like everybody goes to work. And they thought they were going to go to work, finish their day, and return to their families. They didn't, and tragically, they never will.
It was on this day that a ceasefire ends the Persian Gulf War, actress Elizabeth Taylor is born, and children's TV host Fred Rogers dies. This is Today in History for February 27th.
February 27th, 1933. In Berlin, fire gets Germany's parliament building, the Reichstag. The Nazis blamed the communists and used the fire to justify suspending civil liberties, setting up a dictatorship under Adolf Hitler. 1991.
Kuwait is liberated. Iraq's army is defeated. Our military objectives are met.
President George H.W. Bush announces a ceasefire ending the Persian Gulf War. That happens after an American-led coalition drives Iraqi forces out of neighboring Kuwait. Iraq's leader, Saddam Hussein, remains in power until a U.S.-led invasion in 2003 topples his regime. 1932.
You see, George didn't have much push. He wasn't particularly aggressive. In fact, he was sort of a flop.
Actress Elizabeth Taylor, known for volatile movie roles and a well-publicized personal life, is born in London. And 2003.
It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine?
Fred Rogers, host of the popular children's TV show Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, dies in Pittsburgh at the age of 74. Today in history, February 27th. Ross Simpson, The Associated Press.
Samaritan's Purse President Franklin Graham and music artist Michael W. Smith traveled to the island of Guam recently to help hand out gift-filled Operation Christmas Child shoeboxes. It was a chance to light up the lives of so many kids.
Hello, I'm Franklin Graham. Right now, I'm on an island here in the Pacific called Guam. We're here with Operation Christmas Child. The kids are so excited. Michael W. Smith is with me. We had the opportunity to hand out some of the boxes and just sit down and look at the kids and talk to them and see what's in their boxes. There's so much joy, so much just happiness. And it gives us an opportunity to present the gospel. Well, what did you get in your box? Let's see. You got Minnie Mouse. You got that too?
You like red? You got the right watch.
And we pray that these boxes will be used to bring a lot of happiness and joy, but more importantly, the gospel to each heart, all these little children around the world, but especially here in the Pacific. So thank you for the boxes. God bless.
Great to see how the shoeboxes have impacted the lives of so many kids around the world, isn't it? We had lots of sunshine again today and nice and mild. That trend should continue over the next couple of days. Full weather details are on deck. The roads are dry with not a lot of snow on the ground. Jeanette Roche is here now with a look at the weather. Jeanette, not much snow is in the forecast for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, it's lovely springtime weather we're having out there, Hal. Including today, we saw almost a high of 11 degrees today, which is almost the hot spot in Canada. Only BC got a little bit warmer than that with lots of sunshine. Overnight, low tonight, 3 degrees. And into tomorrow, as we head into the weekend, a high of 14 degrees as we climb up into those teens with mainly sunshine and partly cloudy skies. Sunshine, also sunny and windy expected for Saturday with a high of 6 degrees. We're going to drop a little bit on Sunday to 2 degrees with some cloud coverage there. And then lots of sunshine again expected for Monday with a high of 8 degrees. 9 degrees is the high for Tuesday and then 3 degrees on Wednesday. We're definitely keeping in those averages as we're going to see here. The average high is 3, average low -9. We're definitely above that, which is great news for us. 22 degrees was the high temperature back in 1992, and the chilliest day on record was -34. That was in 1955. The sun rose this morning at 7:19 a.m. and it set at 6:09 p.m. And you know what? That's actually giving us 4 minutes more of daylight today than we had yesterday. Looking to tomorrow's forecast for the West Coast, 9 degrees expected tomorrow in Victoria. Vancouver could see some showers with high of 8 degrees. 7 degrees expected in Edmonton and 9 also over in Calgary with a mix of sun and cloud. Lots of sunshine across Saskatchewan tomorrow. 5 degrees is expected to be the high in both Saskatoon and Regina tomorrow. -6 though is the high expected in Winnipeg tomorrow with a mix of sun and cloud. Now further east, we're going to be seeing some snow as that cold front kind of wrapped its way into the eastern part of the country here. Toronto is out of its snowfall warning, but still snowing tomorrow. -3 is the high. Ottawa and Montreal also seeing a storm watch for tonight, but tomorrow it should be lifted. Both of those cities seeing 60% chance of flurries tomorrow, though. Same with Fredericton, 60% chance of flurries tomorrow. Halifax and Charlottetown should be seeing some winter storm-like conditions mixed with some ice pellets tonight. And then St. John's, Newfoundland is under a blowing snow warning there with a high of -1 for tomorrow. There you go. That is your forecast.
Hudson's Bay Company shareholders have voted 98% in favor of Executive Chairman Richard Baker's deal to take the retailer private. Minority shareholders supported the offer by a margin of about 94% after a shareholder group headed by Baker increased its going private offer to $11 a share. The move won over rival shareholder Catalyst Capital Group, which had opposed an earlier offer of $10.30 a share. HBC's Board of Directors unanimously recommended shareholders support the sweetened offer. Husky Energy is reporting a $2.34 billion loss in the fourth quarter compared to a profit of $216 million in the same quarter of 2018. The Calgary-based company says it was hit by asset impairment and other charges related to its long-term price assumptions and reductions in its long-term capital spending plans. It says the non-cash asset impairments were related to its upstream assets in North America, including its Sunrise project. It also included exploration-related write-downs and asset derecognition at its Lima refinery following the completion of a crude oil flexibility project. Revenue was down from $4.99 to $4.79 billion. Maple Leaf Foods says its fourth quarter net earnings were $17.5 million. That is up 46% from the same quarter a year earlier. The company says it will boost its quarterly dividend to 16 cents a share from its previous rate of 14.5 cents. Sales went up from almost $894 million in 2018 to $1 billion. Maple Leaf says it earned 12 cents per share on an adjusted basis. That is down from 29 cents a year earlier and failing to meet analysts' expectations of 17 cents. Chinese regulators say small companies in their country are back to operating at one-third of normal levels after anti-coronavirus control shut down factories and other business. They were promised low-cost loans to get the world's second-largest economy functioning again. The ruling Communist Party has ordered areas of China that are low disease risk to revive manufacturing as many businesses have been shut down for a month. This comes at a time when outbreaks in South Korea, Italy, and Iran have led to travel bans and other controls abroad. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The markets took a beating again today thanks to the coronavirus. The TSX was down 324 points to 16,717. The Dow was down 1,190 points to 25,766. The S&P 500 was down 137 points to 2978. And the NASDAQ was down 414 points to 8566. Oil was down $2.29 a barrel to $46.44. Natural gas was down 10 cents to $1.74. Gold was up 37 cents to $16.4133 an ounce, and silver was down 20 cents to $17.72 an ounce. Wheat is at $224 per metric ton. Barley's also at $224. Canola's at $4.61, and corn is at $259 per metric ton. Live cattle were down $1.45 to $114.20. Feeder cattle were down $1.50 to $134.48. Lean hogs were down $2.60 to $64.93. And the Canadian dollar was down on the day to 74.71 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, today is Budget Day in Alberta, the second one for the UCP government. While our province's Finance Minister Travis Taves is saying Albertans remain on track to end the deficit, the opposition NDP is warning for people to brace for more cuts. The province has lost around 50,000 full-time jobs since Premier Kenney was elected last spring. Taves says the plan is to balance the books by 2023 while introducing a new blueprint to boost employment. You may have the opportunity to fire your local politician. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson has details next on the UCP's Recall Act. That interview is up shortly. And if you'd like to watch our interviews online, you can check us out at bridgecitynews.ca or on our YouTube channel. Just make sure you subscribe. Now, here's a look at the events happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. The Leap of Faith Dessert Night in support of the Elam Society for Senior Citizens Care of Lethbridge is taking place Saturday, February 29th at 7 p.m. at Elam Village's Grand Hall. The evening will feature an array of delicious desserts, music, and drama in celebration of faith and hope. For more information, visit elamlethbridge.org. The Lethbridge Soup Kitchen is holding their second annual sponsored walk on Sunday, March 1st from 2 to 4 p.m. at Henderson Lake. Anyone wishing to walk, please register at the Soup Kitchen by calling Bill Ginther at 403-320-8688 or email lethbridgesoupkitchen@gmail.com. All funds raised at this walk will go to the Lethbridge Soup Kitchen's General Operating Fund. After the walk, hot soup will be served along with prizes for various categories. Are you a Christian business owner who wants to connect with like-minded people? The Canadian Christian Business Federation is launching a Lethbridge chapter, and they invite leaders from all walks of life to a networking breakfast and presentation on Tuesday, March 24th, beginning at 7:15 a.m. at Smitty's on Mayor McGrath Drive South. Hear from guest speaker Canadian Christian Business Federation Executive Director Keith Knight. To confirm your attendance, email tony.ccbf@gmail.com. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
MLAs recently returned to the legislature. We had the throne speech and a bill trying to dissuade protesters from setting up blockades on rail lines and roadways. To chat more about it is the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, also our legislative reporter. Tyler joining me from Edmonton. Tyler, fines for the protesters can be quite severe, and they could also maybe even receive some jail time.
Yeah, that's right. So this is Bill 1 of the new legislative session, and obviously is coming in the context of these rail blockades that we've seen in Ontario, BC. There have been a couple smaller ones in Edmonton and out near Winnipeg as well. So yeah, major fines, $10,000 for protesters, and the possibility of up to 6 months in jail. And as well, there are even larger fines, up to $200,000, I believe, for organizations, I should say, that are advocating these sorts of acts. Now, what the government says, what the province says, is that these are, further penalties to dissuade protest, and especially in cases where their actions are already illegal. So obviously, we've seen some instances where the police have been reluctant to move in and break up these barricades and whatnot. So that is Bill 1, obviously sort of telegraphing in a legislative way some of the anger that Jason Kenney has expressed in recent days. And so that's Bill number 1. That's the first thing we have to look forward to arguing about.
Tyler, let's talk more about Teck Resources shelving its $20.6 billion mining project in northern Alberta. That's a big hit for our economy, as now billions are lost, and so are 7,000 jobs. The debate is, I guess, economics versus the environment, and Minister Seamus O'Regan is visiting Alberta to talk about it.
That's right. So he's on something of a listening tour right now. He was in Edmonton on Wednesday, met with Sonia Savage, the resources minister. Kind of walked into a bit of a firestorm this week. Now we have to sort of back up a little bit to get the full picture on this. And if you remember back a few weeks, there was a chief who had some concerns about the project, the Frontier Mine, saying that environmental concerns and whatnot hadn't been adequately addressed. Now on Sunday afternoon, the Alberta government comes out and says, look, we've just signed an agreement with the two of these groups, and we're good to go. This was one of the last major hurdles. And then sort of hours later, it came out that Teck had announced it was canceling it. So, as you say, environmental economics. So, some analysts have been saying for a long time that they didn't believe this project was viable. The initial forecast that Teck was using when it was developing the project was for $95 a barrel. Now, we're nowhere near that right now, closer to 50 probably. So that's the economic side of it. And of course, there's the other economic angle to it as well, which is that the oil and gas industry is worth like 11% of Canada's GDP. As you said, lots of jobs. This would have been 260,000 barrels of oil a day. And then there's the environmental part of it, which is happening in this sort of much larger context. And this has to do with the federal government wanting emissions caps and the province sort of going back and forth with them to reach an agreement on it. And the CEO of Teck Resources saying that, look, there's this environmental debate that's going on right now that's really affecting policy and affecting regulatory regimes, and that it's just a bit of a scary environment to invest in right now. So, this one project is in many ways, I think, the victim of a whole pile of different things happening right now, whether that's, global oil prices, or, investors getting worried about oil sands investment. I mean, there's a lot happening in this one story.
Now, something the Alberta government did around 50 years ago was to directly invest in our province's energy sector. According to Premier Kenney, we may go down that road again.
Yeah, that was a bit of a shock to many observers, I would say, on Monday when he was giving this sort of pre-throne speech to staff and caucus, and said, Premier Lougheed did this back in the day with the Alberta Energy Company, and the oil sands sort of wouldn't be here without that investment. So what he's sort of proposing is that the government could backstop, could invest in, could prop up, sort of slam dunk kind of projects. We're not talking about, wild goose chase projects as far as the Premier has suggested. What he's suggesting rather is that there are projects that are important, that are imperative, that are viable, and that are the victim of politics, not economics. So, and I think probably the clearest example where this has happened in the last little while is the federal government purchasing the Trans Mountain Expansion project. Once Kinder Morgan sort of got cold feet on it, and they stepped in and said, "Look, this is a viable project. We'll purchase it, give it some stability in the interim." So this is the same idea that Kenney is proposing, which I think came as a little bit of a shock to people who've been watching a guy who is a long-term small C, small government conservative, the former head of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. So, it's an interesting little shift for him, I think, driven by the realities of governing and the realities of the economic situation right now.
The UCP also discussed this week working with a new international investment agency to help drum up investment abroad. What is that going to look like?
Yes, indeed. Details are scant on this, but basically that's going to be it. There's going to be an agency that operates in capital markets around the world that's going to try and drum up investment. So Jason Kenney and his ministers have done a lot of legwork in the last little while, getting out there and promoting Alberta as a good place to invest. So this is, I think, just sort of another step in this sort of plan to get investment dollars flowing back into the province.
Also discussed at the legislature this week, Tyler, was a new bill preventing sex offenders from changing their names.
Yeah, so there were a handful of things that were telegraphed in the throne speech, and that's one of them. Now, this came up a little while ago in Ontario, I believe, and Doug Ford had promised a similar thing. So the idea being that if you are a sex offender who has served their time or whatever and gets back out and changes your name, and then if you Google it, I guess the person's original name wouldn't come up. So this is one of the changes the Alberta government wants to make, prevent that from happening, and yeah, so there's a couple sort of little bits and pieces, little nuggets in that throne speech, and that was certainly one of them.
Alberta wants to introduce a recall act, Tyler, whereby you can potentially fire your MLA, mayor, or city councillor. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, it goes sort of all the way down. I think school trustees are involved in this as well. Goodness, it could be fun. I believe British Columbia has a similar legislation. Often in the cases elsewhere, though, we're talking MLAs and we're talking, the premier. But this, as you say, goes right down to mayors, goes right down to city councillors. This is very much supposed to be sort of a democratic renewal thing. If you don't like your representative, you should be able to, get rid of them. I think where this could get interesting, could get fun, could get dramatic is to what extent this can be weaponized or used by various special interests to muck around in politics outside of the election period. So I think it's going to be very, very interesting to see how this all plays out. And I think people are going to be watching this quite closely.
Could this also potentially set the stage for a referendum on separation?
Well, yes, that's another thing that we saw this week, which is there's going to be legislation that sets out a citizens referendum initiative. And so basically what that means is that any citizen could bring forward a referendum on any subject. Let's say you really wanted a provincial sales tax. Let's say you thought that was the best way out of, Alberta's financial troubles. You could propose that in a referendum and, whatever the process might be, that could come forward. Now, of course, it could be separation as well. As far as we know at this point, the sky is the limit. There have been plenty of jokes on social media about, well, I'm going to propose a referendum that the premier has to wear a pink beach hat for every public announcement. So again, one of those things that we'll have to keep an eye on to see how it plays out. But yes, certainly it could lead in theory to a separation referendum, could lead to a whole bunch of fun stuff.
Premier Kenney seemed quite excited with the fact that the Alberta Court of Appeal sided with him and the fact that the carbon tax was unconstitutional. The province has demanded that it gets lifted ASAP. So what's next, Tyler? The Supreme Court?
Yeah, that's right. So this was a reference case, meaning the Alberta government said, look, Court of Appeals, tell us whether or not you think this is constitutional. So it wasn't a direct lawsuit in the way that these things are often talked about. So yeah, they said 4-1 decision, probably unconstitutional. This tramples all over the toes of the provinces. Now, there have been other carbon tax cases ongoing. So the Alberta Court of Appeal said, yep, unconstitutional. You look over in Saskatchewan and Ontario, the courts there said, no, it's constitutional. So yes, this is going to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court will be the final arbiter on the constitutionality of the Greenhouse Gas and Pollution Act, or whatever the specific name is. It's come in one ear and out the other. So that's what will happen next. Now, as you say, the Alberta government has gone to the feds and said, oh, our court said this is unconstitutional. You should lift the tax on us right now. I'm not super confident the federal government is about to do that or lift it until the Supreme Court makes a decision or something like that. But the good news on that front for Albertans is that tax season is coming up, and we will get rebates this year on the share of the carbon tax we've been paying.
I'm just wondering too, let's say if the Supreme Court of Canada sides with the Alberta government saying, you're right, it was unconstitutional, are we going to see like mega rebates then to all Canadians who pay this carbon tax over the years? You know,
that's a great question, and I mean, I could use a cash deposit in my pocket about
right.
now, I'd say.
I think we all could, you're right. The province has invested millions of dollars into some pretty big capital projects, including $100 million for the Red Deer Regional Hospital and some big bucks into Calgary's Glenbow Museum.
That's right. So there have been a handful of sort of pre-budget announcements, and those are the two sort of big ones this week that we've been keeping an eye on. The loser, it seems at the moment, in some of these capital announcements has actually been Southern Alberta. There hasn't been much going on. You know, I put in a call this week to the government and went through some of the old news releases to say, what are people in Lethbridge getting? What are people in Medicine Hat getting? And you know, it's been rather quiet on that front, I would say. But you're right, they're doing the rounds a little bit, have been doing the rounds, I should say, with some funding announcements. Because, you know, part of what Jason Kenney's been trying to telegraph regarding the budget and in the weeks leading up to the budget was that the easiest way to reach budgetary balance would be to just massively cut capital spending. And they don't especially want to do that, and they don't want it to look like they're doing that. So that is, I think, part of the reason why you are seeing some of these smaller announcements in the weeks leading up to the budget.
The government is also committing $3.4 million to support child advocacy centres for regions like Calgary, Edmonton, Red Deer, and Grand Prairie. And funding apparently will also be set aside for centres here in Lethbridge and Medicine Hat should they become operational.
That's correct. So there you go. There's the thing that seems to have come out in the last few weeks for Southern Alberta. Now, these child advocacy centers have previously operated on annual grants. So the idea now is that there's going to be this 3-year grant cycle that is going to sort of allow for more stable, more long-term funding and planning. So that's been, you know, received quite well by some of the people operating these facilities. But yes, it's for Edmonton and Calgary, Grand Prairie, Lloydminster, I think, Red Deer. And so, yes, the funding is set aside should these centers open in Lethbridge and Medicine Hat. So if anyone's, you know, considering that down there, that's there's money on the table for it.
Tyler, the government of Alberta is also giving easier, more affordable access to dispute resolution services to mobile home site residents and landlords. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so there is a tenancy disagreement body that adjudicates disagreements between landlords and tenants. And up until now, if you lived in a mobile home and had a dispute with your landlord, you basically had to go to court. And so what that looked like was you'd bigger fees mainly to go to court. And so what this change does is allows those who live in mobile homes, who rent mobile homes, to use this dispute resolution board where the fee's like $75, I think. It's a few months wait still to get through. Unless it's urgent, then you can get heard in 25 days. This body's been around since about 2006, I think. Here's some 10,000 cases a year. And I believe the government is going to sort of continue looking as well at more of the sort of tenancy conditions for people who are in mobile homes. So, you know, we are early days, really early days, only a few days into this new session of the legislature, and we're seeing some of these bigger things. You know, Kenney talking about investing in the oil and gas industry. We're seeing some of these smaller things, which, you know, affects the lives of many everyday Albertans.
The Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, joining me once again from Edmonton. Thanks again, Tyler.
My pleasure.
Teenagers are often frustrated with their parents for the rules they need to follow, and parents get frustrated sometimes with their kids not following the rules. Well, today's guest is 20 years of age, used to be a teenager not that long ago, and has some helpful advice on how to smooth out some of the wrinkles. Lissy Reno is the author of the book, The Heart of Your Teen, an insider look at the parent-teen relationship. Lissy, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thanks, Hal. Thanks so much for having me.
You bet. Now, I like that, an insider look at the parent-teen relationship. Lissy, explain what motivated you to write the book.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually come from a big family, so I'm one of 7 kids, and my parents lead a ministry called Visionary Family, And so after high school, I actually took a gap year and I spent half the year at home working with my parents and working with their ministry. And it was really during that time that God really just put this passion on my heart for reaching out to teenagers and helping encourage teenagers in their family relationships. Because no matter what kind of family you have, family relationships are hard for everyone. And no matter what kind of phase of life you're at, and especially during the teen years. And so I kind of began on this journey of helping teenagers kind of look into their family relationships and ask the question, so what does it mean to live for Christ first at home with our families and then everywhere else? And so I began speaking to some youth groups and some churches. And that's when I got connected with a publishing company here in Nashville called Randall House. And Randall House had published a couple of my parents' books. And they reached out to me and they said, "Hey, Lissy, we'd be really interested in you doing a book project with us, but we don't want you to write a book for teenagers. We want you to write a book for parents on how to have a better relationship with their middle school, high school age child." And at first, I was not excited about the idea at all. I was like, I'm not a parent. I'm not an expert on parenting. I was like, maybe I could write a page about this, but there's no way it could be a whole book. But my parents really encouraged me and they were like, okay, Lissy, if God is opening up this door for you, then walk through it and see what happens.
So what are some of the biggest misunderstandings parents have about their teenagers besides defining what a clean bedroom should really look like?
Right. So the best part of this whole project actually was I got to interview teenagers from across the country and ask the question, so what did your parents do really well while you were in high school to help build a relationship with you? And what's one thing that you wish they had done differently? And some of the answers that I received absolutely blew me away. And that's what got me really excited about this book. And some of the things that teenagers said were like, I really wish that my parents would ask me more intentional questions about my life. I really wish they taught me more accountability with my technology and my social media. I really wish my parents would pray more with us as a family or read the Bible more with us as a family. And those answers were like across the board. And so as I started talking to more people and getting those responses, I was like, wow, this could be an incredible message for parents to hear from their teenagers about what they want in that relationship.
Now, you write that when parents give advice and instruction to their kids, sometimes it can maybe backfire a little bit unless it's done in a relational basis. Can you explain?
Yeah, absolutely. So really the whole premise of the heart of your teen is that this idea that relationship has to come before discipleship. So before parents could try and have a discipleship relationship with their child, there has to be the foundation of a loving relationship first. And so the first chapter of the book talks all about how parents can build the foundation of that relationship. And what the book calls it, I talk about what having a heart connected relationship looks like. So a heart connection relationship is one that's full of openness, honesty, trust, and love. So it talks a lot to parents about, okay, what's a great way that you can spend quality time with your teenager? Speak words of affirmation to your teenager. Have fun with them. Pursue their interests, engage in what they love to do and help build the foundation of that relationship.
So how can you create a relationship that is a safe place for your teenager to talk about some key or controversial issues?
Mm-hmm. So I talk about that a lot in a chapter that I write. And really, it's kind of a two-part issue. In talking to teenagers, I found that a lot of parents tend to be kind of on the extremes of certain things. So you have parents that are filled with a lot of grace for their kids to the point where maybe they're not pointing out certain issues that they might have. And then you have a lot of parents that maybe are full of a lot of truth, but don't have a lot of grace. And so what I've found and what's been really helpful in my personal relationship with my parents is that there has to be that combination of grace and truth that pair together. So parents that, some things that my parents would tell me that really helped me in high school were, Lissy, we're committed to you. We love you. No matter what mistakes you make, no matter what you do in your life, we are always going to be committed to you in love. but they would also tell me some things that were really hard to hear sometimes and speak truth into my life where I needed to hear truth. So I really think that one of the most important aspects of having those difficult conversations is to have both the grace and the truth present.
Now, when it comes to parenting, discipline is also a big part of the relationship as well. I remember when my son was really young, really little, he hated, being put into the corner, staring at the walls when he did something he shouldn't do. It's like, this is driving me crazy. Please stop. I'm not going to do that ever again, right? Can you talk a bit about discipline versus the need for affirmation and encouragement?
Absolutely. So, one thing that I noticed in talking with teenagers is that a lot of them talked about how when they were little, their parents gave more direct consequences. So, you do something wrong, you get a consequence. But as they kind of grow up and as we kind of become teenagers, the consequences decrease while the lectures increase. And oftentimes those lectures can be filled with a lot of anger, a lot of bitterness, a lot of annoyance, sometimes on both sides for the parent and for the teenager. And so something that a lot of kids said that as I was talking to them, they're like, I think that if my parents gave me a direct consequence, that would actually preserve our relationship more, because those lectures, all that it's doing is pulling the hearts of teenagers and parents away from each other. Because when that anger gets in, when that bitterness gets in, when that defiance enters in, I think that can be the real problem. And so for me and my parents, a lot of times if they gave me a direct consequence, it actually preserved our relationship better than them, acting out of anger or giving me this long conversation.
Like a reactive reaction, knee-jerk reaction. How can parents effectively get their teens to take their faith seriously and really make it their own?
Yeah, well, I think that I've seen, just as I've been growing up and kind of diving into this topic more, and like I said, how I am not an expert on parenting. I am not a parent myself, so all I can really give is sort of just my observations of what I've seen and what's been really helpful for me. But something that impacted me the most as a teenager and as I've been kind of becoming more independent and making my faith my own is just, first of all, my parents communicating their commitment to me. That was huge. The next would be seeing the faith of my parents active in their own lives. When I come down in the morning to see my dad at the breakfast table with his Bible open and doing his devotions, or my mom sharing with me about how her faith is impacting her personal life. And then also my parents just being willing to allow me to make some decisions about my faith, to press into the fact, it's okay to have doubts sometimes. It's okay to question what you believe. It's actually a good thing to be able to wrestle through those feelings and decide for yourself what you believe. But something that my parents did that was so helpful was just they always communicated that if I was having those feelings or if I was having doubts, they were the safest people in the world for me to talk to about those things. And I could come to them with anything that I was feeling, and they would listen and be able to help me sift through that.
It's not uncommon for a teenager today to say to their parents, I'm not going to church anymore. That's it. I'm done. I'm out. How should parents really handle a situation like that?
I think that's really tough. And I also think it depends on the age of your child. Now, if the child is in middle school, if I were a parent, I would say, okay, if we're paying for your life, if you're living under our roof, you're going to come to church with us because that's what our family does. Now, maybe your teenager is in college and independent and they're not wanting to go to church. Well, at that point, I don't know how much of the parents can force the child to do something, because at that point, you don't want to force your child to be a Christian or to actively live out their faith. It has to be a choice that they make for themselves. So I think a lot of it has to do with parents kind of offering that encouragement, again, offering that commitment, and going back to the base of that relationship. Because, if you have a healthy relational base with your teenager or with your child, no matter what age you are, it's going to be so much easier to have those types of conversations about faith and about church and all of that.
A lot of parents want respect from their teenagers, and I guess teens also want respect from mom and dad too. What needs to happen in order for mutual respect to be there?
during my senior year of high school, God really just convicted me on exactly that issue. And I think it really has to do with the fifth commandment, the call to honor your father and mother. Because for a long time, growing up in my house, and my dad's a pastor, and I was always the good kid on the outside, like, oh, all my teachers and all my friends would always be like, oh, Lissy, you're so great, you're so mature, you're so wise. But at home, my parents would be like, okay, Lissy, you were rude to your sister yesterday. We see you being a little selfish in these areas. We think you need to work on this, this, and this. And really, I think where God really convicted me the most was that, yes, I was obedient to my parents. I wasn't rebellious. I wasn't going out and doing all these things. But the attitude of my heart was one of defiance and bitterness and selfishness. And so it's that piece of what is obedience versus honor, because honor starts in the heart and obedience overflows from that. But if I was having just the actions on the outside that were making me a good kid, but my heart was full of dishonor towards my parents. And so I think that that's something for parents who, even if they have kids that are really young, to be able to start discipling that, because, my parents could tell. If they told me to do something and I obeyed them but had a terrible attitude about it, they knew. And so I think parents can really start seeing that in their kids and start helping them disciple them in those areas.
Now let's talk a bit about social media and technology. What kinds of boundaries should parents be putting in place?
Well, how that is really a hard issue, because social media and technology it's everywhere for teenagers, and it's how we communicate, and it's just so ingrained in our lives. But what I talk about in the book, and there's a chapter on technology, is that really the key ingredient, and the key ingredient in our home was accountability. Because, as parents, you are never going to be able to keep absolutely all the junk outside of your child's life at all times. I mean, it's just impossible in the world that we live in. But in our house, we had to create this culture of accountability. And so when I got my phone, when I got my social media, my parents really communicated to me that, Lissy, your phone is not your private information. Like, we have the right to look at your phone at any time that we want. And even my dad, he would be like, look, Lissy, I don't even think that I'm above accountability. I need, I have accountability partners, and I have, these internet blocking services. And so we want to work together to create an accountability atmosphere in our home, because, that we have this saying that no one is holy enough for a secret online life, whether you're a middle schooler or an adult.
Now, we should also probably talk a bit about dating and the challenges of remaining pure in a sex-saturated world, Lissy. What advice do you have for parents and teenagers when it comes to sex?
I mean, that is a really tough question. And again, I think that it all goes back to that piece of the heart-connected relationship that you have with your child. And so I remember when I was in 8th grade, I think I had a crush on a boy at school. And I just really felt this urge that I needed to be sharing those feelings that I was having with my dad, or just get some advice from him and talk to him. And I just remember having this pit in the bottom of my stomach. It was the last thing in the world that I wanted to do. It just absolutely made me sick. And I was like, this doesn't make any sense. I have a great relationship with my dad. I love my dad. I know my dad loves me. Why am I so afraid to talk to him about these things? And really, I have come to really believe that that was spiritual attack coming against the relationship that I had with my dad. And so I think so much of that, dealing with relationships and sex and dating and all of that, is, if kids feel like their parents are safe people to talk to, then, that's a win. That is a win for that relationship, because what the world is going to say is, to teenagers, is you should talk to everyone else. You should talk to your friends. You should talk to your mentors. You should talk to your youth group leaders. But the last person in the world to talk to is your parents, because there's that fear, that shame and embarrassment. And so I think if parents can really work through that and help build the relationship of trust and openness, that would be so helpful in navigating all those relationships.
Leslie Reno is the author of Heart of Your Teen, an insider look at the parent-teen relationship. Thanks a lot for joining us today from Nashville, Tennessee.
Thanks for having me.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.